normal standards, especially emerging markets, we still lag the general level that is existing in those countries. Likewise, debt, we've done great, brought down debt GDP ratio significantly, but again, we remain on the high side, so more work needs to be done. So in the next 5 years or so, we have no choice but to continue the efforts toward fiscal consolidation and bringing our debt to sustainable levels. In terms of fiscal policy, resilience and growth, we had the presentations from Mr. Thornton and Patrick, and they're basically repeating what I've just said is, for us to set the stage for sustainable growth, we need first to ensure that the appropriate fiscal policies are in place. Otherwise, as we've seen in the past, the problem that happened in 2008 was a direct result of inadequate policies that eventually compromised growth. I showed you the chart whereby we were growing strongly in 2007 to 2008, but it was an artificial growth that was never going to be sustainable. So going forward, it's critical for us to build growth on a sustainable footing. We then discussed the part on monetary policy, some interesting discussions there, whereby, yes, we saw all the good progress Central Bank has done in the last 5 years to put in place the right framework. But more importantly is how this framework and the policies translate to satisfy the needs of the real economy that will come back to create the growth, again, that we're talking about. Mr. Willing, Mr. Madnak and others did raise the issue of competitiveness and how can we maintain competitiveness whilst striving to attain our fiscal and monetary targets. And these are challenges that we pose. We have not answered all the questions today, and this is where the work will remain. We were absent, both of us, for the parastatal reform because we had to meet with the president. But one simple comment I must make is, again, we've made important progress in the last 5 years. We've managed to improve the financial position of all the government parastatals. But unfortunately, today we are living with the result of some of the questionable policies that were taken by parastatals. We know the experience of Seychelles, CEPEC, that today the people of Seychelles are still paying the burden of policies that could have been avoided with better monitoring and control of public enterprises. And an important element also that was raised that we do take note is the need for government to ensure that in trying to deal with market imperfections that exist in a tiny economy like ours through government intervention, that this intervention is limited to fixing the market imperfection, but not meaning that government has to go back and be a player in the economy. Let the private sector run the economy, let the private sector be the engine of growth. Government, let's facilitate by putting in place the right policies, the right environment. Finally, we just discussed the important issue of inclusive growth, another extremely interesting session that I think we've all drawn important lessons in there. The conclusion being, why grow if it doesn't benefit everyone? With this, I will just give the floor to Mr. Mills to complement.
Okay, thank you. That was a very good summary. So allow me to reiterate some of your points, coming with a fresh set of eyes to Seychelles. I was very struck by just how great the difficulties were that you faced at the beginning of the program, hearing about the severe disruption to the welfare and lives of the Seychellois. And it helps appreciate how important the reforms were, but also how difficult they were to undertake. And they were indeed very deep and wide-ranging reforms. As we saw in the first session, they were able to minimize the difficulty of the reforms. Growth returned rather quickly. The unemployment was fairly temporary, but that doesn't mean that they weren't difficult to undertake. There was some very deep restructuring in the public sector in particular. So that was impressive. There was, I think, a broad agreement that more remains to be done, and some of that is based on the Seychelles' inherent vulnerability as a small island economy. There's a need to build up buffers, perhaps as much as other emerging markets, or maybe even more so. And these buffers would include building reserves, as we discussed during the monetary session. Also having a continued strategy for reducing public debt. And in the session on fiscal policy, there was a lot of emphasis on the value of having a fiscal anchor. As the president reiterated, the overarching goal is to reduce public debt to 50% of GDP. And as Patrick pointed out, once that's reached, there should be some perspective on where public debt should go after that. So this in such a small, vulnerable economy is a necessary anchor, and it's something that needs to be thought about further. But I was very pleased that the current overarching objective was widely accepted, and is being implemented so effectively. On fiscal policy also, there was a lot of discussion of ensuring that there's adequate resources for investment. And this ties into a lot of the other sessions, including on inclusive growth. The president spoke about the quality of growth, too. So investing both in infrastructure and in the Seychellois people. This will be a challenge going forward, and particularly at the same time as you have a fiscal anchor, which is about the fiscal balances and the public debt. Finding those resources will be a challenge going forward, but there was, again, a broad agreement on the importance of doing that. So that was very encouraging. And Patrick spoke about developing a medium-term fiscal framework in order to ensure that that's protected going forward. I also, unfortunately, missed the session on parastatals. There was some discussion about the risks from parastatals to the public finances during Patrick's presentation, and I know what Ashwin highlighted, the need to minimize those risks going forward. There's been an important improvement in the finances of parastatals currently, but as history showed, there's always a risk that it'll come back onto the balance sheet of the government. And some of the principles that Ashwin spoke about can help guide efforts to minimize that risk. I understand there was a lively debate following that session, so that's one issue that further discussion might be useful. Then on inclusive growth, I think the president spoke very eloquently about the need to ensure that everyone benefits from the growth and the elements that are necessary to achieve that. And in the later session, we spoke a lot about productivity, productivity that's based on investing in human capital and also in infrastructure. At the same time, what underlied a lot of the discussion earlier in the day was ensuring that you have a good policy framework in place. And I think the measures are approximate, where we looked at productivity falling in the period in the run-up to the crisis. But the overall policy framework does make a difference for productivity and then ultimately the success of inclusive growth. So perhaps with that observation, Minister, if you have anything to add.
No, I think Marshall, I think we've tried to cover more. I think as happy as Minister and other people are, it's been a long day. I think we're right on the mark in terms of time. I will just end by first thanking, in his absence, the President for having joined us here. I thank all those who came this morning who have left. I want to thank the IMF for organizing this conference, extremely important conference. I, of course, want to thank all the presenters, all the participants, especially those who talked, but equally those who did not. And I think we go back home with a lot of takeaways from this important event. And I must say that I'm very pleased to see the number of people still around at this time, which shows how much this conference has really been good in terms of the quality and the messages sent out. I thank the media for having covered. I thank especially those who have come out, the World Bank. I know, unfortunately, the person from FDB had missed the plane, or there was a problem with the plane, they could not be here. I want to thank the EU, everyone who is here today, and once again, thank you for your support and for your participation. Thank you, MC. Thank you. Okay, so you can go home. We have to stay for a media press conference. So again, good evening.